And so we have the next 30 minutes for questions or comments to our two speakers today. So my question to George is, how do we deal with brokenness at those levels? What do we do with our own broken selves, even before we deal with the brokenness in society?
Thank you, Rachel. First, I would like to underline the fact that we will always live in brokenness. In fact, there is this notion that when we are in Christ Jesus, that we are safe and out of brokenness. That's not the reality, and that's not even what is promised. There is a brokenness that we will continue to experience as being part of this world. That's why I gave examples of people who have ambiguous characterizations in the Bible, like David. Actually, all of the humans in the Bible were experiencing brokenness. So one way, obviously, what we know is that, again, managing part of that brokenness for people to experience God's shalom, the peace that only God gives. One of it is when we proselyte, when we share the good news of Jesus Christ, it makes a huge difference. But we must be aware that even when we have experienced forgiveness and redemption, when we get into those systems, we ourselves experience brokenness. And that's why often we are when we have some of our brothers and sisters join the political, sphere, and these places where the terrains are huge, we have very high expectations of them. We should appreciate that there is brokenness. So brokenness is not something that is resolved once when we come to faith. It is actually a journey. So at some point you realize that there's a brokenness you are experiencing while you are actually even in the mission field. We continually need to go back to the cross and be able to seek God's help, God's forgiveness, and God's strength. So that's what I would say about the issue of personal brokenness. But I would like to again say at another level for the non-Christians, and I said this earlier, that even when they don't come to faith, all is not lost. In fact, as I mentioned, God is the God of Christians, but he's also the God of Nebuchadnezzar. He demands Nebuchadnezzar to respond and do justice to his people. So it's important then that when it comes to that level, then we are able to, to engage even the oppressor, because the oppressor, first of all, needs to be flagged for what they are doing, responsibility. But the oppressor, like Cain, is also a captive, and that's part of what I expressed. In fact, I would even go ahead and say, in the effort of bringing justice, we must work with people who are not like us. When I got into, I have served in government parastatal NACADA as a board member for the last 3 years. And I had to make relationships, build relationships with the people who are not necessarily Christians, and you might even think they are, because that's part of God's instrument to bring change and bring redemption. So let me stop at that.
May I add something?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for Christians, we must also appreciate that the brokenness is the whole thing about salvation. I mean, you appreciate, you acknowledge the fact that you are saved or you are a believer because you experience that brokenness, and you know that it is part of the struggle that you are with. So I think acknowledging that that is the situation is with you as an individual is important. But also in addition to that is to use the Jesus model, that Jesus became very vulnerable. In fact, Philippians tells us how he left his glory to come into this world. He became very vulnerable. He experienced this difficulty. and at times even wept. But within that awareness, he was also he knew the cause, he knew the purpose for which he had come, and I think that Jesus model is what we must also pick as Christians, that we have been given a lot of power and guarantee of his continuous power by God. Authority has been given to us, but that power must also be measured within our vulnerability. So when we go out there, we must appreciate that we have a lot of power, but how do we get into that situation of suffering, of hopelessness, so that we can turn around things? So I just wanted to bring that out so that Christians don't look like we are outside, and we must stay outside, and we are not into the situation of brokenness.
Thank you for those responses. I still continue to encourage us to post comments or questions in the chat. Even as I wait for you to do that, I just want to touch on something George has mentioned. So he started off by saying free will can be the source of brokenness. In the case of Cain, he made a choice. And then Stephen talked about structural or systemic injustice. And so my question to Stephen is, when is what is wrong in society a result of individual choices? And when is it a result of systemic problems? And so George has talked about the victim sometimes, also the perpetrator also sometimes being a victim. And so, for example, when you look at the United States, the high rates of crime among the Black community, and all the time we are told it's because there's been histories since slavery. Yet some of the ills are because people have taken drugs, because people have gotten into crime. So when is what is wrong as a result of an individual choice, and when should we blame it on the system? That's to Stephen.
Okay, thanks for that. You see, individual choice, they are tied. It's really not something to really separate as such, but we should appreciate that they are tied. An individual choice impacts on somebody else. There is hardly a situation whereby your individual choice does not affect somebody else. So if you say drink and drive carelessly and knock somebody else and they die, that is an individual, and then it impacts on somebody else. And so whatever we do falls into the community and falls into the society, and the society has developed systems. The overall purpose for these systems that the society has developed is so that it manages as well. So if the individual in the community takes bribes, then of course, then if that person, for example, is a judge, then they will take bribes and not give good judgment. So even if the court system was supposed to work, but this individual decision or activity by, say, a judge will not make the judgment come out well. And so the victim of the oppression, the system looks like the system is perpetuating that, but it is the individual within the system that causes this system to sort of work in that manner. If you look at it from, say, a court example.
I would like to thank the speakers, George and Stephen, that have talked very, very well. My names are Honorable David Sudi, and I would like to do my small presentation, or to add the voice of the speakers. The rain started hitting Kenya when we adopted images of creatures created by God as symbols of political parties, which is against God's second commandment. For example, symbol of political party KANU is a cockerel, and symbol of political party Jubilee are two arms of Guru and Hutu holding each other hands. When we ask the government, when we address the government, we say, tunaomba serikali tusaidie. You are praying to a government of an idol, which is led by like a cockerel or whatever. That is where we have been having problems all this time, and we need to change from there. Where there seems to be no way, God has provided a way. And there is, if you look at the registrar of political parties, there's a party there whose registration number is 40, meaning after 40 years in the wilderness, the children of Israel crossed the River Jordan. And the symbol of this party is a bridge to take us across the River Jordan, rather than when we are led by political leaders who took us up to River Jordan, and they say that there were crocodiles. From there, they left us in the wilderness again. So let us take this as a challenge to us Christians to change this nation. We as Christians, not the bishops, not whatever, we as the body of Christ. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Sudi. My next question goes back to George. You talked about anger in response to brokenness. And so you are talking about Cain, who when God asked him, got angry, and the anger was the wrong response. Yet we also know in the Bible, we hear about righteous anger. Is anger ever a valid response to the brokenness in society? And if it is, what are we supposed to do with our anger?
Well, it boils us to the semantics and just the what anger is. You see, when you qualify it and say righteous anger, you almost saying that the outcome should be positive. And I think just speaking at it from there, remember there's a time when Paul talks of godly sorrow. I mean, sorrow is something that we should not be sorrowful in the negative sense, but he says if sorrow leads to godliness, that is good. But in the case of Cain here, we find that is the anger that is leading to unrighteousness, escalating the sin. And so I'm just commenting on the use of words like anger, but affirming the fact that as Christians, we really should be angry at the evil we see. But that anger, how we translate it, anger can be heat. But in our society, we need more light than heat. And I think that raises the whole question of when we are consumed and we have that passion, you can even call it anger, to bring change. How do we then have the biblical and theological understanding? How do we relate to the victim, the poor? And how do we relate to even the oppressor? Because our goal is actually to have light. And that's why I said that in the process of seeking light, you almost need compassion and the wisdom to be able to mobilize all that there is. The government, sometimes when they have these gurus in IT who are involved in cybercrime, when they get them, they use the same people to resolve the issues. We must be conventional in our approach to solving some of these things, especially when they are systemic, they are structural, and we are thinking long term. So let's say that yes, we can be consumed and angry, but let that heat translate into light, using all God's resources available to us. Thank you.
May I add something
if
to
we
that?
could all unmute is it Peter Langya? Thank you. This one goes back to Stephen. Now, you talked about the link between power and injustice. And my question to you is, from your experience, how do we tilt the scales of power so that we can empower people and communities to confront injustice. And so, for example, one of the things I have around the whole BBI debate, where we were talking about one of the excuses given for BBI is to prevent post-election violence, such as we saw, and there the driving motivation is fear. We need to be so afraid of the country going up into flames that we change the constitution. Now, fear is not empowering, fear is actually disempowering. And so how do we move from fear about all the things wrong with our society to actually empowering individuals and communities to be able to change the power imbalances that we have in our country?
Okay, I think one of the things is this word we have called awareness creation. And that's a very strong first step, in the sense that people may feel the anger, as we were talking, the anger, that righteous anger that wants to make you move. But if you are not aware of the strategies, or even where to start or how to go about it, then you are sort of defeated, and so you just sit back and it becomes cyclic, in the sense that you see it, but there is nothing to be done. So I think awareness creation is a first step. Secondly is the numbers. There is something strong in numbers. So there is something great in numbers that overwhelms a situation or an individual. So organizing people into groups and numbers, and creating a narrative that can confront a situation and can seek to modify. And so that number is important. Then thirdly is the narrative that explains really what the situation is like. Is our problem rigged elections, or is it what? This post-election violence, or this fear in elections, what really is the correct narrative? So there must be a correct narrative, and this narrative should not be left to the politicians, if you like. So it is then that group, that number, must organize itself into a narrative that says, what is the problem? Is the problem rigging of election? Is the problem IBC? Is the problem the courts? Then you move from there. So after the correct narrative is the idea that people must be willing to take up the power. You see, in Jesus' model, it's rather controversial, because Jesus took up the power by dying first. And so the resurrected Jesus is so powerful. Before that, we may have been disappointed with Jesus' model. But in our model as Christians, I believe that Christians should be in activism as a sort of consolidating power. It's just that the activism should not be violent. The Christians must avoid violence, but activism that raises power, knowledge, and makes people be able to confront these systems must be there. So say at an individual level, can a community go to the courts and ask that, look, we deserve a school, or we deserve good water without the BBI? Do we need the BBI or a politician's thought to get good schools or good water, good clean water? It's already in the constitution. So how can a community organize themselves and go and demand good water, even by going to the courts? So that is the kind of thing that I see tilting the power towards the weak. But lastly is the sustainability of that power. And the sustainability, and I think this is where believers are strong. The sustainability must acknowledge the fact that in our daily lives, we are broken. You can't sit today and expect good tomorrow. You must continually work on it. You work on correcting things. You must continually challenge bad things. You must continually monitor. You must continually do things to correct them. So you don't do it and then you sit back expecting that it will work.
I want to give a chance to somebody to ask a question, the same way Honorable David Sudi did. If you prefer to talk than to type, I give you 30 seconds to indicate you want to speak. Anybody who wants to speak from the floor?
And Rachel, if
Yes.
somebody comes in, just a little comment on what Stephen has said.
Go ahead.
I talked about a culture that there can be a sin culture, and sometimes very specific, because even statistically, we are known to be a corrupt country. How we deal with specific sin cultures is significant, because in one way, when we engage, we already find ourselves overwhelmed. And actually, part of it is to understand how we get there. And one of the ways is basically when things are done repeatedly. We have people stealing in small and big repeatedly, and then it is tolerated, it is not punished. We find very few people or a few people who have stolen big monies, they go unpunished. And that's just one way that perpetuates one specific sin culture in a place. And I think then, as Christians, we need to have various levels of intervention on that matter, and some of them take very long. We are now talking about bottom-up, top-down, but in an ideal sense, if we had a Joash in a place of position, then they would be able to begin dealing with those idols. So part of the encouragement, again, is to say that some of the interns who are here, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, maybe they will be at the top. And there is that influence. But even before then, we need to think about creating narratives that don't make some of the evil things look good. And I think that's a big issue that as Christians we need first to understand how do we create cultures, those negative cultures, but then how do we create counter narratives to be able to confront them.
Okay, I can see 3 hands, so I'll take those 3, and then because of time, we will stop. So I'll take them in this order. Sorry, I will go by gender first. So Rachel Knight, and then Reverend Joseph Chengo, and then Abraham Rugo. And depending on the nature of the question or comment, then either Stephen or George can respond. So those 3 in that order, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. A question has been lingering in my mind during the facilitations that we've had from George and Stephen, and that yes, there are genuine and needy people in the society who actually need our help. And we are living in times whereby people have presented themselves as poor people or needy people, or created stories that would move one to indeed help, yet the real aspect of poverty is not in their situation. So how can we discern that this is actually an honest and genuine person that needs help? Yeah.
Thank you. Reverend Chango, please.
Yeah, mine is, first of all, to appreciate the 2 speakers, and they have come through very clearly on these topics. I coordinate a ministry in CITAM, the ministry that is to the senior citizens. And recently, on the 8th of this month, we actually went on our CBS to try and help families to come to the awareness, to raise the awareness because of the injustice that we are seeing in the family, fightings and what have you, the things that we have just been seeing. We actually went on CBS and brought in one of our judges in this country to address the issues that we perceive to be pertinent. That is, succession and so on. That is actually causing a lot of havoc in this nation. So my question is, maybe to our brother George and also our brother Stephen, how do you see this GPRO being empowering younger people to actually move in and in this space that we are talking about, to help cap the evils that we are seeing, particularly in the younger generation in this society, where younger generation, many of them are feeling that the older people are sitting too long on some of these things that they need to release to the younger people. Maybe it's just a thought that I'm thinking we need to have a way of helping to reach the younger people and saying, no, it's important to take the baton in the right way. It's important to be patient, and it's important to learn, so that when you take the baton, you are also taking it at the right time, and don't be too impatient. I mean, these are some of the things I'm just thinking. Maybe anyone of you can react on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Chengo. Arms, your question, and then I will hand over to George and Stephen to respond to the three. Arms, please.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Rachel, and thanks, George and Stephen. Nice to see you, George. It's been a while. So mine is really a comment, and I wanted to say that listening to George and especially Stephen, who has been on this space for quite a while, I just want to speak an encouragement to all of us that you don't have to wait until you have a big platform to attack injustice. So to think that when I become the leader of the organization, or I become that judge, that politician, then I will deal with injustice. I think we have opportunities presented to us every day that we can do something about. But I think a starting point, which has been a very big help for me, is to, it's a Daniel principle of saying that I will not be associated with injustices. I will not advance injustices. Basically, Daniel resolved in his mind that he would not consume, because many times I find that and having conversations with many a young person, we have actually not resolved not to be, to be associated with injustice. So we think injustice is bad when it is happening to others, but when it is benefiting us, because sometimes a lot of injustice does benefit us, we look at the other side. We say, after all, it's not denying me a chance on the table. So I think really starting with that, because opportunities to be part of the unjust system will present themselves, but also opportunities to be able to advance justice for God's people will present. So for me, it's really an encouragement, and I have seen it in my own walk, in my own work, where you have an opportunity to make a decision that basically turns the life around for somebody else. So really, thank you so much, Stephen and George, for that, expounding that so well. And as I've said, really, for me, it's to agree that we all can do something, and we start now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the encouragement. So very quickly, George and Stephen, if you can respond to the questions raised.
Well, maybe I go first then. Rachel, your question could be a dilemma for all of us in terms of determining what when a request is fake or it is genuine. I would say that is really circumstantial. Really, one would need to deal with each case on individual basis, and it just requires our discernment. There's a way in which sometimes, if you have been deceived once when somebody is asking for help, you can go to the extreme and saying these days these people are, and that generalization might hinder you from helping people. On the other hand, that experience can also help you to be a bit more discerning. So I don't think I have a sweeping response to that, just to help, within those parameters. But on the second question, Mr. Chengo, thank you. Now, I just three quick things. One, it's a good thing that you have started a conversation. And I think when we have issues in the society, one of the things to do is for people to come out and have conversations. And we then would encourage, people who are here, if that is an issue, that we continue having more conversations about that. But the second one, which is more pertinent, is to ask, how did we get there? How did we get to a point whereby now the issue of, children need to be patient? I mean, they need to be patient, but the kind of poverty that is there now, people are living longer and they also want to have livelihoods. So there is a conflict. So we need to then say that we cannot focus on the wealth bit before we focus on the relationship in family. Because if there is a relationship in family that is healthy, then the wealth issue becomes secondary. So if we go thinking about wealth and succession, and it is controversial, it means that there are some other investments that we are not doing at the family level, and that should be a flag for us. But thirdly, the possibility of mediation. Now that in some places we are already there, you can't reverse the past necessarily, then we need to deal with the issues of negotiations at some point or the other. But now, essentially, that also speaks to the injustice in the society. If you have, people, even parents who are wealthy and their children have no means, then already there is an injustice issue there that needs to be confronted. So conversations to go on. Let's think about the relationships within families and communities before they escalate into those class wars, generational wars, but also mediation options. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just give some very quick points. For the first questions to Rachel, I think we can use the model of the Good Samaritan. So if there is a case, a needy case, the story of the Good Samaritan, you remember the guy who was beaten up and so on. So if you got a case, address that case and address it fully and wholeheartedly. But then sit back again and say, why does it happen? Why do people get mugged on the Samaritan Road every other time? What's wrong with Samaritan Road? So now you move it from the person to the system. And so why do we have so many needy children that don't get school fees? And yet school is supposed to be free. And there is also resources. So when you get back there, you'll find out what really is happening. So that, because dealing with the individual and chasing whether they are genuine or not genuine, as my brother said, may be difficult. But I think when we go back and analyze why are so many people, many children not getting to school because of school fees? Why aren't people getting justice? What is wrong with accessibility to court? Why are people not getting, hospital treatment and such like thing? So you go back to see what is happening. Now, the other point I want to raise on that is at individual level, it may be difficult, and that is where we come as a team. And that is where I think that our faith should be practiced as a movement. How do we act as a movement that can create those changes? As for Mr. Chengo, I also just agree with our brother Gallos in the sense that I think, okay, we must first of all identify the problem rather than just spreading it everywhere. But in this case, I think it starts with the relationships in our family. I would imagine that if I've got wealth and I've got children, then the children would be so happy that we enjoy this wealth together. Why would my children be in a hurry that I die or share out this wealth? So I think, and even in the story of the prodigal son, the motive, there is a motive there that doesn't necessarily arise from a relationship, but can be understood within the relationship and something done about it, good done about it. For Abraham, I just want to thank you. And as you resolve that you will not, the other side of the coin is you attack. So it is good that you resolve that I will not be involved. But when it is happening and happening to somebody else, what will you do? And I think you are not supposed just to play safe that, okay, I'm not involved and I'm not bothered, because we have been given a lot of power, but we are supposed to use that to defend the vulnerable. So you won't take a widow's property, but when you see a widow's property being grabbed, and you are a neighbor, or it comes to your knowledge, then you are supposed to help that widow. Are you a lawyer? Can you defend that widow free of charge? So that is how to look at the other side of that coin. Thanks.
All right. Honorable Sudi, I will give you 30 seconds to make your comment, and then I'll hand it back to Wilson Kuna.
Thank you, Rachel. Mine is just to thank the panelists and tell them that there's a solution to what we are seeing now. As Christians, if you can give them my number, because I've been in political field for a long time, and I've come across all this. We as body of Christ, we will solve these things when we are in power. And that is what I want you to tell you now, that we have put a way where there seems to be no way, there's a way God has provided. So if Rachel, you can share my number with Olang and George, we will be able to carry this discussion further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. We really appreciate your moderation, and thank you, George, and thank you, Stephen, for just bringing your experience to our context, and we are so grateful. We are sorry that our time has spilled over a little bit, but now we have come to the end of our forum today, and I just want to thank you all for your presence today and your continued commitment to journeying with us, even as we seek to raise the next generation of values-driven leadership for this country, young people and men and women who are going to make a difference for the kingdom of God in our nation.